Hi, I'm Professor Wendy. Welcome and thanks for tuning in to Cool Seminary Tutorials.
In today's video, we're going to look at some of the philosophy behind women's roles in the medieval Roman Catholic Church.
In the second edition of her book entitled Her Story, Women in Christian Tradition, historian Barbara J. McHaffey argues that the dominant images of women in medieval times tended to the extremes of either inferior, wicked, and dangerous, as in a temptress or even a witch, or as spiritual, pure, and holy, as in an ascetic nun or even the Virgin Mary. While this dichotomy may seem extreme, it reflected not only the views of some major early and medieval theologians, but also the dualism of the Greco-Roman world in which much of Western medieval philosophy and theology were developed. The dualism of Greco-Roman culture tended to divide reality into two spheres, that of the mind and spirit on the one hand, and that of the body and the flesh on the other hand. While mind and spirit were aligned with strength and virtue, the body and flesh were viewed as that which must be subdued, conquered, and overcome, lest it be a temptation leading to sin, evil, and eternal damnation. By the medieval era, many of the churchmen who wrote and taught in the Christian church reflected not only this Greco-Roman dualism, but also their own struggles with temptations of the flesh. Because of this tendency for men to be tempted by the bodies and flesh of women, that is, it would have only seemed natural or logical to men to associate women with body, flesh, temptation, sin, and evil. For example, as early as the 3rd century, influential Christian theologian Tertullian railed in a treatise called Adorning Women against the unique sinfulness of women. In an effort to persuade women to dress modestly, to avoid tempting men, that is, he wrote, quote, "Do you not know that you are each an Eve? The sentence of God on this sex of yours lives in this age. The guilt must of necessity live also. You are the devil's gateway. You are the unsealer of that forbidden tree. You are the first deserter of the divine law. You are she who persuaded him whom the devil was not valiant enough to attack. You destroyed so easily God's image, man. On account of your desert, that is, death, even the Son of God had to die." End quote. This association of women with body, flesh, temptation, sin, and evil in turn was used as justification for the widespread belief in the superiority of men and the inferiority of women. It was also used increasingly as justification for suppressing the presence of women in leadership in the Christian church. 4th century theologian John Chrysostom argued in his homily 9 on 1 Timothy that man was made preeminent in the created order because he was created first, that is, in the Genesis creation narrative. This preeminence was reinforced, secondly, according to Chrysostom, quote, "from the event that transpired shortly thereafter. She taught the man once, upset everything, and made him liable to disobedience. Therefore, God subjected her, since she used her rule, or rather her equality of honor, badly. Your inclination shall be for your husband, God told her." Before this event, these words had not been said, Chrysostom observed. Chrysostom goes on to argue that Eve's sin was way worse than Adam's sin because Eve allowed herself to be deceived by a lesser creature, that is, an animal, whereas Adam was only lured or persuaded to partake of the forbidden fruit by his wife. Chrysostom also contends that Eve's sin was transferred to all women. He wrote, It certainly does concern other women. For the female sex is weak and vain, and here this is said of the whole sex. For he does not say, quote, Eve was deceived, but the woman, which is the common name of the sex, not her particular name. The female sex sinned, not the male. What then? Do women have salvation? Most certainly. And how is that? Through having children. End quote. Later, 13th century Roman Catholic theologian Thomas Aquinas, in conversation with ancient Greek biology, taught that the male sperm generated the original form of a human being, that is, the male. On this basis, he believed that females were misbegotten aberrations of the true male human, and thus women were weak and less intelligent and must be ruled by men. At best, women were designed as helpers to men, and their most important role was to support the conception and growth of male seed. These theologians, influenced by dualistic interpretations of Scripture and sometimes by their own personal struggles, embedded these views into the teachings of the Roman Catholic Church. This process began then not with Jesus Christ himself or his teachings, but in those early centuries of the Christian Church as it became more and more influenced by Greek and Roman culture. Increasingly, as the Church expanded and institutionalized itself, these views were written into its rules and its teachings. Thus, Church and culture reinforced each other more and more along dualistic gender lines. It wasn't until the 16th century that belief in the spiritual equality of women and men was reintroduced widely to Christianity through humanist culture and Reformation interpretations of Scripture. Meanwhile, in the medieval church and world, women were viewed as less able than men to make correct moral decisions. They were required to honor and obey their husbands, regardless of how their husbands behaved. Husbands were legally permitted to beat their wives to control their supposed corruption and disobedience. Marriage, for the purposes of procreation and social control, was eventually given sacramental status by the Roman Church. Virginity was viewed as the best and only holy lifestyle for women to disassociate them from sexuality and evil. The medieval Christian Church taught that the one way women could overcome their inheritance and nature of sinfulness was to deny their bodies, remain virgins, and live lives of chastity, poverty, and obedience. In fact, by the end of the 3rd century, many women and men adopted ascetic lifestyles in which they denied themselves all earthly pleasures in their efforts to follow Jesus. Initially, most of these ascetics or hermits lived solitary lives in the desert or in caves. Others lived together in marriage but without sexual relations. Still others formed communities and lived together in groups for accountability, protection, and discipline. Yet others became recluses or anchorites who lived in small cells adjacent to a church, a monastery, or an abbey. The life of virginity was one path then that allowed women to deny their sinful flesh and pattern their lives instead after the model of the Holy Virgin Mary. In upcoming videos, we'll explore further medieval Christianity's admiration of and devotion to the Virgin Mary as the supreme model of virtue and piety. I'm Professor Wendy. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video or learned something from it, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to be notified of upcoming videos on this channel. And most of all, have fun learning.